3, 2, 1, and welcome back to Chasin the Racin.
And welcome back to the podcast powered by OMG Bennett's. And I'm going to get it right this time because last time I made a right balls of it, which is not so good. So we've got JCT Truck Trailer Rental. And like discussed beforehand, they're proud sponsors of like Lee Johnson, and they've come on board with the show just to keep it going. So thank you so much to you guys. And as you all know, we get individual sponsors for each show, and this week is JDR Racing, which is Josh Davies Racing. They're a new team stepping up into Supersport. They've got 2 riders, and this is where it's going to be a bit interesting for our guests that we've got on, but I'll let Joe introduce that. They are going to be one of the only people on the grid on Yamahas this year, which is going to be very spicy. So thank you so much for let me get my words out. Thank you for it. Can you finish this off, guys?
Thanks to all the sponsors for
all our sponsors
coming on board and supporting the podcast.
And we're gonna and just sack me off, Joe. Then
no, you're all right. You're muddling through. You're making your point.
I'm doing a terrible job of it. And as you can hear, the co-host for this evening is the wonderful, delicious Joe Akroyd. How we doing, son?
I'm good, mate. Yeah.
Mint.
Thanks for having me back. Again.
mate, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here either. So simple as that. So you have our proud honour of introducing our guest this evening.
You've bigged this up for me,
mate.
The big.
We're expecting professionalism, Joe.
Yeah, I don't know.
He is glaring at you like a boss.
Yeah. Do not screw this up.
I think you'd be better introducing yourself, and then you get your job title right.
All right, okay.
You just don't want to get sacked here.
So we're joined this evening by Mr. Steve Sargent of Triumph Motorcycles, which is going to be a little bit different for us because
I'm not a racer.
You're not a racer, but you're going to give us a completely different angle on
the industry.
The industry, motorsport. It'll just be something a bit different for us. But I've been trying to pin you down for
ages, forever,
and you just keep telling me you're washing your hair.
Which, as you can see, I have done.
There's always a reason. No, you're a busy man, very busy man. So we appreciate you giving your time.
Yeah, no worries.
I tell you, I think the best way of going, like starting, is specifically a job role before we go into the fact of how you got into that role. So what do you do, my man? The pressure's on now.
So the official title is Chief Product Officer, which at Triumph basically means you look after the product strategy. So basically deciding what are the bikes Triumph's going to make in the future, what are the spec of those bikes need to be, how are we going to compete against the competition in the market, what are going to be the things that make people want to buy a Triumph rather than something else. So all that kind of stuff, really. So, fairly broad brush at a high level. What areas of the market do we want to compete in? What segments do we want to compete in? And then how we're going to compete in that segment? What does the bike need to be? Where we're going to have an advantage over other people? So, roughly, that's it.
No. Hold on. I feel like we're going to finish the interview there. We're not. By the way. But so, fundamentally, what I'm really excited about is as Joe's big job, massively mind, and he's a big lad, so you can imagine how high this pedestal is right now. But you fundamentally made the decision for Triumph to go racing.
Kind of. I mean, we, obviously we've got.
I don't think I worded it quite like that, but
I'm wording it now.
I mean, Triumph's got a bit of a history of racing, but they've never kind of officially gone into racing as a factory. So, even back in the day in the 60s and the 70s, Triumph never officially had a Grand Prix racing team, for example. There were people racing Triumphs, in the Grand Prix in the 60s, but Triumph never actually had an official racing team. And, Triumph obviously disappeared at the end of the 70s. They went bankrupt, basically. And they were bought out by a guy called John Bloor. And John Bloor's made his money out of building houses.
The man's a legend, absolute legend.
Okay, first, I have to be careful what I say, but obviously, I still do want a job.
Yeah.
But so John made his money out of house building, and he is still the most successful private house builder in the country. So, as you travel around the country, you see a lot of Bloor home sites. So that's where John made his money. And at the end of the 70s, when Triumph went bankrupt, it was up for sale as a brand, and John got involved because at that time the old Triumph factory site was also up for sale, and it was an opportunity for a bit of housing land. And off of the back of that, he also spoke to the guys who were the receivers for the old Triumph company, and they said, well, do you want to also buy the Triumph trademarks, the Triumph brand? So John thought, yeah, why not? There's lots of theories about whether he did it because he wanted to get the bike side up and running again. There's lots of theories about whether he just bought it for the housing side. And I've spoken to a lot of different people who said, he definitely just wanted it for the housing, or no, he definitely wanted to do something with the brand. Anyway, I've never had that conversation directly with him.
Why not?
I kind of have, and I kind of skirted around it a little bit. And the only thing that he'd say to me is, if I had my time again, I wouldn't have done it.
He's a true motorcycle fan.
But if he did just buy it for the housing side of stuff, he's made a fucking good job of doing motorbikes as a bit of a sideline, I think, really. When it comes to a business.
I mean, the thing that I really admire about John is that he's a really, really successful businessman, obviously, but John's always thought about the long-term plan about what he wants to do. So he's never gone into business to make a quick buck. He's never looked at the short term. He's not one of those guys. He wants to build something and he wants to grow it. And if you speak to John about what's the thing that he's most proud of what he's done, what he's most proud about what he's done is basically giving people jobs. And, bringing people in, guys like myself. I mean, I joined the company when I was 25. Bringing people in, giving them skills, building them up with the company, giving them opportunities that they wouldn't have had otherwise. So, that's one of the things that John's always been very proud of. And he's very proud of being a British businessman, if you like. So,
how old is Triumph before he bought it? Like, how old is the brand Triumph?
So the brand started in 1902.
Wow. So
it is one of the oldest motorcycle brands.
Okay, quick question. How old's BSA? I know that's not your department, suppose it's a swear word, but I'm just thinking, like, that's a British brand. Triumph for a British brand.
Yeah, so BSA's not as old as Triumph. I don't know exactly when BSA started.
Right, so Triumph's older.
So Triumph's oldest. Triumph is the oldest British brand.
BSA's Indian now, isn't it?
So, I don't know, but as far as a British fit, but that's it. I did not know that Triumph were older than that.
So I think Harley might be a year older or something like that, but in terms of British brands, then Triumph is the oldest British brand.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, that's now, to be fair, 70 odd years leading up to that, like 60 odd years. Sorry, I'm not the mathematician, that was Chris's department. You know what I mean? 100%. But no, that's a long, long history. But do you know why they went bankrupt, roughly?
Well, basically, the Japanese came in.
Right.
So in the 60s, the British brands were very, very, very dominant, really. So you had Triumph being very successful, BSA, Norton being very, very successful. And out of those brands, probably Norton would probably be the ones that were most recognised for racing back in the day. So the British brands were very, very successful. The Japanese brands started to come in mid-60s.
Yes.
And I think the main issue was that the British brands didn't take them seriously enough, quickly enough. And I think, Honda did a fabulous job of actually deciding that the way that they were going to make a name for themselves and the way that they were going to demonstrate their credibility was basically by going racing. So, a lot of the guys back in the day will talk about Honda suddenly appearing at the Isle of Man TT with a massive team and a massive entourage, and they were competitive straight away. And it kind of blew everybody's minds, really.
Can you imagine that now? Can you imagine how frightening that would be now if a manufacturer turned up that none of us had really...
But, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that could happen again. So, if you look at what's happening now in the motorcycle industry, you've got a hell of a lot of brands that people have never heard of suddenly coming out of China. So you've got your QJ Motos, your Coves, guys who, again, people had never really heard of them, CF Motos. All of those guys are now trying to get into racing because they've probably seen what the Japanese did in the 60s and said, that's how the Japanese disrupted this industry. That's how we're going to disrupt this industry.
I like that, disrupt this industry.
That's what it's all about. It is. It's about coming in and taking it by surprise so that people haven't got enough time to react and really coming in and trying to dominate stuff. So, and that's what the Japanese did.
I quite like that, though, because I think it fires the other manufacturers up to respond, which means that the consumer gets a better product, don't they? Because everybody's got to react.
From my side, the good thing about it is because you've seen that history of how the Japanese did it in the 60s and they came in and the British didn't really take them that seriously and they were too late to respond to it. This time round, we're all kind of thinking, okay, we know what you guys are going to try and do. We can see that you're going to come in and try and like disrupt and come in with technology. You're going to come in initially probably with fairly low pricing, blah, blah, blah. But because we've seen that history of it in the past, it's like, okay, I need to think about that.
And to be fair to the Chinese, I remember when Chinese manufacturers started bringing out the scooters, and they, like when I was growing up, it was a Peugeot Speed Fighters. They were the things, or them Italjet drag stars. They were the scooters, weren't they? And then the Chinese turned up with the things that no one had ever heard of, that if you dropped them at the traffic lights, they just exploded, didn't they? Because they were just made out of bin cans and dog shit. And now they're actually producing things that you have to start taking a little bit more seriously. They're lacking in the summer, and the finishes aren't maybe of to the specification that that we've come accustomed to. Yeah, but actually, they're a long way from what they were when they first came out, and people do need to take them seriously, don't they?
Yeah, you do. I mean, we, as a business, we definitely have to take them seriously. I mean, like you say, when they first came out, you looked up and you thought, well, that's a bit iffy. The quality of that's not great. There's no way we'd get away with doing that there, that kind of stuff.
Always heavy.
Yeah,
cast out of the Titanic or something.
And generally the styling's a little bit challenging. You look at it and think, well, they haven't quite understood kind of Western styling and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But all of those things can be fixed over time. And the amount of money that they've got to throw into the R&D side of things, you've got to take that seriously as well. So,
but also we know firsthand that India are taking Western personnel, aren't they, and taking them over, which is a huge thing, isn't it? Because if they've got the budget to pay, for one of argument's sake, one of Triumph's guys to go and work for them over there, they're able to take that influence and take first-hand.
Yeah, I mean, they can do that, but it's not that simple. So everybody thinks like the way to come into an industry and get a foothold in there and try and develop yourself is, okay, those guys over there, they've developed the expertise, they know what they're doing. Let's go and pick some of their good guys and bring them into our organisation. But what people don't understand is, as an organisation grows, it develops a culture over time. And you can't just take one part of that culture and make the rest of it work. You've got to, it has to be a holistic kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's where I think, a lot of these guys think, well, I just need to pluck that one guy out of there and that one guy out of there. And there's been guys who've been plucked out of Triumph, right? So there's been guys that have been taken over to work for some of the Indian companies, some of the Chinese companies. Quite a few of those guys have spent a couple of years over there, and then they've come back to us and we've said, well, how was the experience of working in, can't name the companies, obviously, but how was that?
This is going to edit this, and we're just going to go.
I've never tried so hard not to mention names or companies when I was trying to say my last bit then, yeah.
We should all just be wearing masks, so whistle blowing there.
But, you speak to those guys and you say, well, what was that like? And they said, well, it was an interesting experience, but at the end of the day, what people don't understand is the culture that sits behind Triumph that drives it forwards, and what all of that means in terms of getting the product right and making the decisions that you need to make at the right time. So it's not as simple as just pulling expertise out of somewhere.
You can't that's very interesting. So you need to buy a brand. Is that what you're saying at the moment?
Well, a brand is part of the equation, really. I mean, it's not just, you can't just have a brand without something that sits behind it, and the engineering and the marketing and everything else.
For example, you use a perfect example. It's like, take them. I would love to ask the question, how much. Tell you what, I'm going to ask the question. If I have bollocks to it, you know what I mean? If money was nothing, I bloody wish. Like you're saying, you're trying to build a following over behind the backing of a brand. Triumph have built that from 1906, and. The fit 1902. You see, shut up, you.
Sorry,
we'll edit that bit out.
We'll change that. But so it's got confidence in the product. Triumph have got the steep history, and you can't replace that steep history. For example, if I wanted to make a company without the name, say CRF Mo, for example, how much would that cost? It is stabbing a dark figure to go. We need R&D. We need to make everything to make the best bike possible. Billions? Millions?
Hundreds of millions to get yourself up off the ground. To become a serious player in that industry, you've got to be talking about putting hundreds of millions in. And that was the thing that John Bloor did. Is in the early days, obviously. I mean, when I joined the company, we were making just over 12,000 bikes a year. You cannot make a business out of selling 12,000 bikes a year.
No,
I mean, if you look at the history of the motorcycle industry, there's lots of brands who've thought, well, I can come in as a niche brand, and I'm going to sell 100 bikes at 50 grand, 100 grand. All of those businesses go bankrupt. Because in motorcycle world, there aren't that many people who have got that kind of money to spend on a motorbike. If you go to luxury car world, you can do that.
Yes.
You can sell a few hundred luxury cars at $500,000 a piece, and you can make a business out of it. But in motorcycle world, there's been so many brands that have thought that that's the way of doing it. And it just never ever works out. So to make a business out of motorcycles, you really do need a certain level of volume to be able to make it make sense.
Is that because of the culture of motorcycles? We've got cars. Perfect example. You're saying you can make a £5 million car, and then someone from the other side of the world goes, "Well, bollocks, I'll have 2 of those."
Yeah.
Is that culture based? Is it because? I see motorbikes a little bit different.
Do you not think some of that's accessibility though? Nearly everybody has a car driving, car license, don't they? But a bike, the bike world is almost it's a luxury that people have because they want to go and do their bike test, whereas a car test is almost a necessity now, isn't it? So then
I think it's just a numbers thing at the end of the day. I mean, there are just so many more car drivers in the world than there are motorcycle riders, and the number of billionaires who are motorcycle riders is relatively small compared to the number of billionaires who drive a car.
This is why you're in the job role you're in, because you worded what I tried to say, but you made complete sense of it.
I'm reading your mind, Joe.
That's exactly what I mean. Is you've got a small pool, haven't you? Because it is not everybody's asked about doing the bike test, are they? It's just not.
That's right. I mean, and there are billionaires out there who are obviously massively into bikes. But what those guys
tune
tend
in,
to
by
do,
the way.
Sponsorship opportunities are available.
What those guys tend to do though is they have a collection of bikes. So rather than spend $500,000 on one bike, they'll go out and they'll buy a rare MotoGP bike and whatever.
We've with that World Endurance team, the Metis guys, they were trying to sell off their bikes at the end, which they still are.
Yeah,
and I know the collectors were more interested in something that could have a heritage and a history to it. That's what collectors like, isn't it?
Well, they're more interested in something that's won something, Joe, I think.
Well, we'll brush all that. God loves a trier. Savage. Can you put the heating on there, Joe? It got cold in here. I'm going to turn it off, to be honest with you, because I'm getting a bit warm under it.
No, but it's I want to go back to that word culture again. How as a brand, or any brand, not just Triumph, make it more desirable? Cars are desirable. I know what you mean about the necessity, but we're talking about that billionaire element. Let's talk about that. And there's only, I'm spitting figures out, 10% billionaires like motorcycles, and they'll buy those bikes. But how do we turn them 10% into 50 or 60? Is it a job of a manufacturer to turn bikes desirable, more desirable, trying to attract a new market?
Well, I mean, we do some, sort of special limited edition bikes that we charge more money for, and they are more exclusive. But the number of those that you can actually do is relatively limited, again, just because of the size of the pool of the market. So for example, we did a collection of bikes that are called Triumph Factory Customs. And what we do is we bling them up. We put a lot of carbon fibre bits on them. We do a lot of billet machine parts on them. We'll do some tuning in the engine, give them a bit more power and all that kind of stuff. And generally you can charge, a few £1,000s more for those kind of things. We did, just coming back to the racing, we did the Daytona Moto 2 limited edition bike with nice carbon fibre fairings.
I remember that, yeah.
And got one in the garage, don't like to say, but
location disclosed.
We won't give out your address, don't worry.
But again, those kind of limited edition bikes, you can make a bit more money out of those. But in terms of as a brand, how do you add more value to your brand? You add more value to your brand by being associated with credible things. So in our case, whether that's like movie stars, obviously we've done stuff with the James Bond franchise. We had 2 bikes in the last James Bond movie. We've done stuff with David Beckham. Historically, Triumph has always been associated with film stars like Steve McQueen,
Gibson
Marlon
Guitars. Was it Gibson Guitars?
Yeah, we did a thing with Gibson Guitars. We've got a great relationship with Breitling watches. So we did a limited edition Breitling version of one of our bikes, and they got a limited edition Breitling watch, which is very nice. So those kind of associations help. I have not got one of those in the garage. I haven't even got one in the house.
No, but that is very, very impressive, and it's a bit like it's just trying to build that culture up more and more. And like you say, associating watches and everything. I'm biased. Motorcycling is the best sport in the world, and you just think, why aren't more people involved in motorcycles?
Yeah,
but is it?
But the balance has always been a little bit like that. That's always been the difficulty. And I remember going to the NEC when I was maybe 12 or 13, and you went then, and the NEC was 4 or 5 halls in size, wasn't it? It was massive. There were birds everywhere in spandex giving out calendars and shit pens, but it was all.
And that's what you were there for, right?
Absolutely.
No, I'm not
with bags full of free pens and key rings and stickers, and
but
it's changed. It's changed, hasn't it? It's 2 halls now, and the stands are smaller. And
I think the reality is though that it's got harder and harder for young people to get into bikes. And that is a big issue for us as an industry, I think, because the way the licensing laws work now, in terms of having to work your way through like an A1 license, then an A2 license, and then a full license.
Can you still do a direct access or not?
No, but you still have to go through the itinerary, so you are paying more to get your license, but you still have to sit the individual. You can do a direct access.
But you still have to do you've got to be 3 stages.
You've got to be over 24 to do that.
Is it 24 now?
Yeah, to do that direct access.
I did my direct access at 18. I never had a scooter, just went straight in and did. So that's what it is now.
Yeah.
I knew it got hard. I didn't realise that.
So I passed my test at 17 on a Yamaha 125. And literally, you had to ride around the block and not fall off. And the guy didn't even follow you. He stood on one corner, so he could actually only see you come down 2 bits of the block. And then, honestly,
so you could crash at turn 1 and
my
turn
mate did.
2.
So my mate, honestly, my mate fell off round the back, still passed his test because the guy didn't see him fall off.
And that man became Joe Akroyd's dad.
Learn from the best.
But that's how it was. But the very next day, you could have gone out and bought a 1,000cc sport bike, but you can't do that anymore. And even if you could, you wouldn't be able to afford to insure it.
Without getting the tin hats on and like the conspiracy theories. Why is that?
Sorry, but you wouldn't even be able to afford the GSXR 125 that you need to go and do your first bit. Because how much is one of them now? Never mind insuring it. What are they, 7 or 8 grand or something ridiculous? Do you know what? I was talking to someone the other day, and they told me, I was asking about the price of, because I'm tight, how much an Enduro bike could be. And they were like, you're probably looking at about 12 grand now.
Easy.
And I always thought Enduro bikes were about 6,000 or 7,000 quid brand new.
No, I mean you can get an enduro bike for about just under 8 grand.
Still a lot of money in it.
It is a lot of money.
How much did your GSXR 125? Because your lad had one, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean obviously he didn't get a new one because I'm tight as well. But
we didn't say Triumph on the tank.
I didn't say Triumph on it. But we bought his for about 3 grand.
Yeah,
second hand.
But you see, like it's.
But I stopped when I was 16. I bought a fizzy. Me and my dad, 60 quid from a lad up the road. It was fucked. Knackered.
No, the word fuck gives a better image in the mind.
Makes you more relatable.
It does.
So we
that was a bad bike.
So we spent all winter doing that up into something that was actually rideable. But 60 quid cost me 25 quid to insure it.
There you are.
Yeah.
But going back to my question, why is it becoming more difficult?
Well,
to pass your test.
I mean,
I have no idea.
I mean, basically they changed the legislation because if you go back to like the 80s, 90s, there were a lot of bad accidents on motorbikes from, youngsters really like being dickheads on the road. I mean, I remember I used to go to a biker meeting just the other side of Nottingham, and there was a bit of a humpback bridge just before this pub. Everybody used to congregate in the pub, and the nutters used to come down the hill, hit this fucking humpback bridge, and see how far they could fly.
Yes.
Do you know the first thing that came into my head when you said humpback bridge? Then I thought, this sounds fun.
Yeah.
She's a fucking idiot, hell.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the kind of thing that got motorcycling a bad rap, really. And then as soon as politicians get involved, it's like, right, how can we clamp down on that and make it more hard?
Do you guys, as manufacturers, have any pull in that area?
Politically, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, all of the manufacturers in the UK are members of the MCIA, Motorcycle Industry Association, and what they do is they lobby on behalf of motorcycling, really, to speak to government officials. And one of the things that they are really pushing is trying to make it easier for people to get a bike license, but also to make sure that the training is a bit more professional.
Right.
I mean, to be honest, one of the issues I have at the moment with the way motorcycle licensing work is you can ride a 125 after a one-day CBT course. That course is not what I would call great.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah, go round the cone, son. And that's it.
No, and the problem with that is, if you want to just ride a 125, you've got to do that every 2 years. Now they don't do that with cars.
No.
Which is ridiculous. And the other thing they don't do with cars is they don't stop you from going out and buying a Ferrari after you've passed your test either.
Yeah.
But what the MCIA are basically saying is, if we make that test a little bit more professional, why do you have to do it every 2 years? Why can't somebody, once they've passed that...
Make it a 3-day course with a little bit of classroom.
Yeah, and then actually, once you've passed your test for a couple of years, instead of having to do another test, why can't you just go back and revisit your training centre and then say... I followed this guy around. He's safe. He's absolutely fine. Why do you have to go through the expense of going through additional training and more testing to then go on to the next level? So, I mean, there's a lot of lobbying going on in the background to try and make it a bit easier, but it definitely needs to get easier.
That goes without saying, because anyone, all my mates don't have bike licenses. You know what I mean? A majority of the people in the race paddock, it's only Chrissy. He only just recently passed his bike, he just passed his bike license even when he was doing stock 1000.
Yeah.
And bearing in mind, he had an entire career leading up to that. He could ride a bike, but people don't want to do it anymore. They just simply don't.
Are you of the same mentality that everybody should have to do a stint on a scooter or something? Because that's quite something that quite often gets, you hear people saying that everybody should have to do at least 12 months on a scooter or something.
I think it makes you a better driver.
Yeah.
Whether you should have to do it, I mean, my daughter did her CBT and then I followed her around on her scooter, and quite honestly, I'm happy she's not on it anymore because she was bloody dangerous. But I do think a period of time on two wheels and feeling like exposed like you do, and having to be aware of everything that's around you, definitely makes you a better driver.
Totally agree on that. Totally agree on that. But there we go.
Going back to you touched earlier on when you started, which if you told us how long you'd been there, then we could work out how old you are. So we're not going to do that. At what point did you get involved in the racing side of stuff?
So that's relatively recently. I mean, just to give you, I will go back and just give you a bit of history.
No, go for it. Yeah.
So I've been nearly 30 years at Triumph now, which that's forever, isn't it?
Same jumper, by the way.
Same jumper. No, I've got two of them. So
it was barely watched.
So yeah, I started off working in Hinckley when we were only doing 12,000 bikes a year, and I started off working in the purchasing department. So because I've always been into my bikes, and I've been into bikes since I was a kid, when I joined the company and they understood, I knew a bit about bikes, they put me in the purchasing department. They put me in charge of all of the technical stuff, like the suspension, clutches, gearboxes, carburetors back in those days.
So what are they?
Yeah, exactly.
Bye, you must be really old.
So that's what I did when I first started. I was dealing with all that kind of stuff. A lot of that stuff was being sourced in Japan at the time because the British motorcycle industry had disappeared. So the only place you could buy suspension, decent suspension, was from the Japanese. The only place you could buy decent carburetors was from the Japanese. So we were doing a lot of that. And then John Bloor said to me, look, we need to try and resource out of Japan a little bit because Japanese stuff's like super expensive. We didn't move any of the real technical stuff, but we started trying to move some of the other stuff. So I was traveling a hell of a lot. I was traveling like every 4-6 weeks. I was flying from the UK out to Asia to, Taiwan, China, all these kind of places. Did that for a couple of years. And I said to John, I said, look, I'm traveling so much, mate. I didn't say mate, obviously, sir. I'm traveling so much. Wouldn't it make sense if we actually had a base out in Asia rather than me flying all the time? So we set up an office in Kuala Lumpur. And there was a small team of us that based ourselves over there, doing all of the sourcing out of Asia to ship it back into Hinckley. So did that for a couple of years.
How did you even start that conversation? I've got a great idea. We're going to set up a bit. Get your checkbook out.
Well, was that you and people from over here, or did you source local?
So we brought some locals in as well, but initially it was me and 2 other expat guys that moved out there. But I mean, the conversation came about because I was on a trip with John. I used to travel quite a lot with John in the early days, and we were in Kuala Lumpur, and Kuala Lumpur's actually a really nice place. And I said to John, I said, you know what, if I was to live somewhere in Asia, I could quite live here. And that's really how the conversation started.
I'm sorry, but I've got this great image of you two on a beach, cocaine.
Oh yeah,
just like that, like suntan, watching. Like, I'll be pissing down with snow here. I've got a great idea. Get that drink down, yeah. Then we'll talk.
Yeah, we've not met John Bloor, have we?
No.
Yeah. So that's how it kind of came about, me being over there. And then I was out there for a couple of years, and John came out on another trip, and he said, look, me old son, because he likes to call you me old son. So he said, look, me old son, he says, we're doing a great job over here, but I really want to think about moving some of the manufacturing out of the UK. And I said, oh, that's interesting. He said, you've travelled around this area. He said, well, what's your thoughts? Where do you think we should be? And I said, well, a lot of the other Kawasaki, Yamaha, Honda were already in Thailand. And there was a decent supply base in Thailand. So I said, well, the obvious choice for me, John, is Thailand. And he said, so you fucking better get on with that then. And I thought, I didn't mean me. Yeah. So I ended up going out to Thailand and setting up the factories in Thailand.
Which is not a small...
That makes it sound like it's going to bloody little.
Yeah, you've sort of played that down a little bit, really. That makes you sound like you've put a tin shed up and put a few guys in it with a lathe and a milling machine.
Like, that's it. Triumph made out of duct tape,
It's quite a big concern, isn't it?
Well, at the time, it was mind-blowing, mate, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of like, well, I've never run a factory before in my life. I've never run a business in my life. Definitely never run a business in Thailand in my life. I've never lived in Thailand in my life. So it was like,
What age were you?
32, I think, back then.
Would you do it all again?
Yeah. You know what? I would. I absolutely would, because the experience was unbelievable, mind-blowing, at times massively, massively stressful. But I had a great bunch of guys working for me. I had half a dozen expats came out and started helping me out, and then we started bringing in the locals. And I'll tell you what, working with Thai people is just brilliant. If you tell them what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve, and why it's important, they will go above and beyond to make it happen. So,
really?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the mentality is brilliant.
Have you still got a tie to the people out there? Do you still have a tie to that factory? Do you have to go out and take a look at things? Or has that all been over?
That's not part of my responsibility now. So there's thank God.
You got it
thank God. No, I mean, when I came back in 2011.
Right, that's recent then, really.
Yeah, and we just finished building the third factory over there then, and there was like 800 people working there. Since I've come back, it's moved on again, and it's developed even more, and they've put more processes in and all this kind of stuff. So it's just continued to grow, and some of the guys who worked for me over there are still over there. And they've been out there for 25 years, some of those guys now, more or less. Which is mind-blowing, isn't it?
I'm genuinely shocked because I'll Triumph, British company, you expect it. I'm going to be honest, I thought it was a little bit smaller. I know Triumph have a huge reach, but that's how naive I am to that industry side of it.
Yeah,
I'm shocked that how many factories are out there now, roughly?
So we've got 3 in Thailand.
3 in Thailand.
We've got obviously the main headquarters in the UK.
Yeah.
So all of the R&D, all of the engineering, all of the bike development is in the UK, which is why I'm based in the UK.
Yeah.
We've got a factory in India, just for the Indian market, and we've got one in Brazil just for the Brazilian market. But those factories in India and Brazil, what they do is basically they take a kit of parts that are shipped out of Thailand, and then they build it back up into a bike, and then sell it locally.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it's an unbelievably diverse and complicated business.
And you're just sitting there chilled as anything. It's just how you're delivering this is just incredible. It's just I'm me and him are sweating trying to think of this.
I listened to
don't try and think of it honestly. Honestly, it'll blow your mind.
I was listening to that Joe Rogan podcast, which Chrissy got me onto actually.
Yeah,
and he had Elon Musk on, and he was talking about building those Cybertrucks. Building, and he said he didn't want to downplay the development side of creating a product. He said, but actually that's the easy bit. He
100%.
said the most difficult part of the whole process is manufacturing, and manufacturing to make the costs make sense at the end of it, where you can make a profit.
Yeah.
And when you're as big a company as what Triumph are, there's a lot of people that need feeding.
Yeah.
Isn't there? There's a lot of families dependent on that company selling motorbikes.
There's a lot of companies out there who start up in the motorcycle industry, and I think, particularly now that we're moving into like electric motorcycles, there's a lot of startup companies who think, I'm going to get into doing electric motorcycles or wherever it is. And they think the difficult bit is designing the motorcycle.
That's the easy bit.
That is the easy bit.
Yeah.
Manufacturing it at a cost, like you say, that you can then sell it at a price that you can make money on, that's hard.
Yeah.
Distribution is ridiculously hard. Getting your brand name out there and getting people to know who you are takes a hell of a long time. I mean, Triumph's been around forever, and even now, if we go out and do some market research even in the US, I mean, the US is such a big country. To get your name out so that it's well known throughout the US is unbelievably hard. And we'll go out and do some research in parts of the US where, our recognition might be only half as much as Harley Davidson, for example.
Yeah.
And we've been around forever. And if you go out there and say, have you ever heard of, one of these Chinese brands, let's not name one, but but if you go out there and say, have you ever heard of them? They'll be like, who are they?
Yeah. But that is the States, isn't it? They are very... Insular. That's the word, yeah.
Is that the biggest egg to crack as a business, the US? So
it's a massive market. So at the moment, for Triumph, it is our biggest market in terms of volume of sales. And, obviously, Harley Davidson have got a hugely successful business, but the reason why their business is massively successful is because they've got a huge domestic market. And in the US, loyalty to Harley Davidson is massive. It's starting to change a little bit, but even so, you've got such a massive domestic sales base. It's almost like for Harley, they don't need to crack the rest of the world so much because they've got such a massive domestic market. Whereas for Triumph, I mean, we could be number one in our domestic market, but we've still got to be successful in France, in Germany, in Italy, in Spain, in America. We've got to really get a decent market share everywhere.
Because it's like you say, you're talking about markets, but you barely see any Harley Davidson. Sorry. Harley Davidsons anywhere. Like when I'm driving up, I've only seen 3-4 shops.
Yeah.
Sitting here now, traveling up and down the country, I think there's one.
There's one in Leeds.
There's one in Newcastle, I mean, properly tucked out the way, mind. I mean, you couldn't see it from the road, no nothing. It's nowhere near the, the hub of motorcycles where you've got Triumph next door to Honda and next door to Kawasaki.
But I do wonder, not to have a snipe at other manufacturers, if I word it that way, that how many of a particular nation that is quite insular, how many of their employees have ever actually left their said country and seen the roads of... You ever ridden through Bradford or through any of West Yorkshire? You would not want to ride
a Harley Davidson through that.
Just, you know what I mean? There's a certain application where motorbikes work.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite funny. I mean, like in the UK, the thought of riding a Harley around kind of makes me, But you go to the US,
I feel sick.
Yeah.
But you go to the US and you see like the long straight roads, and you like if you go to like San Diego or California or somewhere, and you see like guys cruising up and down the beach roads and stuff, it kind of makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
I rode one in Australia on a beach road in 40-degree heat in a pair of shorts and t-shirt and an open face helmet on a quiet beachside road, and it's the only time that and I thought I'm never going to ride anything like this. And
here you are on the podcast admitting to the world that you own a bit.
That's where the beard came from.
I didn't have a vest on at the time or a leather jacket, but it did kind of make sense. You kind of think, I get it, because the road just does that. And it's got the backdrop and all the rest of it.
And you don't need to go fast.
No, but then you come and try and get your way out of Ashby. It's not.
Yeah. But then I tell you what, that's a perfect example of like the market now, because to be blunt, what you see on the road is Taurus.
Yeah.
You see, your Triumph Tigers, you see your GSs, you see the sit-up beg, heated grips, heated seats going off into Scotland. And you know what?
Make complete sense.
Well, you know what? I'm gonna from my point of view, racing bikes, I would not buy a sports bike for the road.
No.
That is my only opinion on it, because you race, you're part of racing, and you know what the bikes can do, and you're talking about that tailored market, you and your Hardly Dangerous in the beach going up and down. That's your catered market. But if I was going to buy a road bike now, it would be a big tourer for just doing the miles.
Tiger 900. I just think they're mega.
You're on commission, so don't believe it.
I'm not. I genuinely, if I was walking to anywhere with my own money, I'd buy a Tiger 900 because you could use it every single day.
But I mean, this is the part of the problem with having a lot of your racing based on production bikes, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because those production bikes are, you guys are used to racing. Who's going to develop those in the future? Because there's no market for them.
No. Is that the reason Triumph have never built a superbike?
Yeah.
Because it's just a complete...
It's just the cost of developing a 1,000cc sport bike is horrendous.
As
a triple, you'd have to build a 11 something, wouldn't you? Yeah,
1160 or something.
Yeah.
Hey, sorry, I'm thinking that, the yellow Triumph for the Union Jack on the front, that wasn't 1,000.
No.
Right. Because I remember Bruce Anstey, at the Northwest 200 and the Alaman TT. And that's actually shocked me. I genuinely thought that was
Craig Jones bike, wasn't it?
Yeah. So that was a 600. So Bruce won a TT on it, didn't he?
Yeah.
McGuinness rode it as well, didn't he?
McGuinness rode it.
Jim Moody?
Yeah. I think we had a 4-rider team that year.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Bruce actually won it. But yeah, I was a 4-cylinder.
Did you ever get tempted to go down there? Let's build 1,000 and show them what we can do.
Yeah.
Has that ever been discussed?
Yeah, I mean, throughout the history of since I've been at Triumph in Hinckley, it's always been shouldn't we be doing that? But then when you look at the numbers and you look at how much it'll cost you to develop it, and then particularly in the last 10 years, you look at where the sales of those kind of bikes has gone. I mean, have you seen a new Fireblade on the road? Honestly, you just don't see them, do you? No. Whereas back in the day, back in the 90s, they were everywhere, weren't they?
Oh, the power ranges were out in force, weren't they?
Yeah.
Matching levers.
R1s, when the R1s came out, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, one of the issues here is that because the manufacturers have wanted to win superbike races, they've made the bikes more and more track focused and race focused, and they've moved it away from something that is anything close to being practical as a road bike.
Yeah.
So you're putting a hell of a lot of money into developing a bike that really is there just for you to go racing, to homologate really to go racing with. And for a business like Triumph, I mean, okay, we're a lot bigger than we've been historically, and Triumph's making more bikes now than it ever has, even in the 60s. But for a company of our size to invest that kind of money on a bike that you can't sell a lot of just doesn't make any sense.
But you're also into that. I've just done a feature for Fast Bikes a few months ago, which was the homologation special, and we had a Fireblade.
Was that when you got the tour around the Isle of Man?
Yeah. The BMW M1000RR and the Panigale.
Yeah.
The price of them things, if you take the Honda out of the equation, but even the Honda is 25,000 quid.
Yeah.
And a race spec one.
And the BMW's 35, and I think the Ducati was 42, and then an exhaust system was 8,000 quid for it. Well, which is not achievable, is it? It's not. Who has that kind of money to spend on?
But it's also, even the guys who are still in it, the likes of your BMWs, your Ducatis and that, how long are they going to continue pushing money into that? If they can't sell bikes off the back of it.
Yeah.
And let's face it, I mean, some of these bikes now, on some of the tracks that they're racing on, are too fast for the tracks that they're racing on.
Yeah. So somewhere like Most.
Yeah, somewhere like Most. Yeah. I mean, you take the British Championship, your Cadwell Parks, places like that. Alton.
Yeah.
Knockhill.
Snetterton.
But hold on. When you sit, no racer's ever gotten a motorcycle and gone, I want this a bit slower.
Yeah.
I'm just putting that out there.
I don't think it's a question of that, is it? Yeah. It's a question of how safe are the tracks at that speed.
On a short circuit, right?
I'm not sure I agree with that.
I'll tell you who does agree with it is Dorna.
Yeah, that's much bigger than me, to be fair.
So Dorna are already talking about how do we take some speed out of not just superbikes, but also how do we take some speed out of MotoGP.
I just seen something yesterday about, is it 2027? They want to change Aprilia. Somebody's been vocal from Aprilia about trying to knock them back to where they should be the same speed as Superbike. There shouldn't be such a big deficit between
I think
Superbike.
I think Dorna will always want MotoGP bikes to be faster than Superbikes.
They should
without
be,
doubt. They should be. They should be the pinnacle, shouldn't they?
The prototypes, they should be, yeah.
But I think Dorna are actually actively looking at pulling both championships back a little bit from where they are now.
But when you look at the history of that, though, remember when they went from 1,000-litre bikes to 800s? They went quicker.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's the interesting element. It's there's a good example, like Oliver's Mount. They stopped having 1,000cc's there because they deemed it safer. You corner harder on a 600 than you do in an upright. It's just, it blows my mind. But then you were talking about that element to it. The more power you give, they're going to go slower through the corners. And then speed it up down the straights.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? But when you look at that history, things are going to change.
Some clever engineers, they'll find a way of going faster, won't they? If they can't do it down the straights, they will find a way of.
That's right. Well, that's racing, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's the whole thing about racing.
Brilliant.
But yeah, I mean, Dorna are definitely looking at ways of reducing top speeds. So I'll be interested to see where they go with it. There'll almost certainly be a reduction in capacity in MotoGP. What happens in Superbike, I think, will depend upon how many manufacturers say that they're willing to keep investing in developing Superbikes, quite honestly.
God, Bennett, the future's a scary place, but thank God we're not in it quite yet. But we're breaching into that market beautifully now with the MotoGP. How long has Triumph been involved in the Moto2 project? You were briefly discussing this on the way down.
Well, because it's always longer than what I remember. I think you and me had a conversation. I said something like, is it about 7 years? And you went, no, Joe, it's 2011 or whatever it was. And I remember thinking, Jesus, you guys have been in a lot longer than what it feels like.
Yeah, so this is our fifth year now.
Yeah.
In Moto2, and then we were discussing it with Dorna for a good couple of years before that, I guess.
How did that conversation come about? Was that you saying we really should be pitching in here?
No, I mean, it came about really completely by chance. So there used to be a guy who worked at Triumph when I started, and he was the head of engine development back in the day. And then he left to set up his own engineering consultancy business. And as part of that, he got to work with Kenny Roberts. When Kenny was developing his own engines because he'd been let down by a couple of other manufacturers who'd promised him engines for his own Grand Prix effort, and that all went a bit sour. So basically Kenny decided that he was going to develop his own engines, and this guy got involved working with him as a consultant on developing, I think it was a V5 engine that he was developing back then.
Was that real ugly Proton MotoGP bike?
Well, beauty's in the beholder, isn't it?
It was that era.
Yeah, I don't want to comment on that. But anyway, so this guy got involved in the MotoGP paddock, and as part of that, he got to know Trevor Morris. So Trevor Morris works for a company called Extern Pro, and when Dorna started the Moto 2 Championship, obviously they started off with Honda engines, and originally they were done by a company in Switzerland, and after a while that, for whatever reason, wasn't working out, so Dorna decided to set up their own engine building company called Extern Pro, and Trevor was brought in. Trevor's been around the MotoGP paddock forever, and he's been mechanic for like Mick Doohan and all sorts of guys at Honda. Sit down with him for an hour or two, it'd be brilliant. So anyway, Trevor was looking after Stern Pro. Neil got to know Trevor. Trevor said to Neil, the Honda contract is coming up for renewal. Do you know anybody that might be interested? And so Neil got on the phone to me, because we'd kept in touch since he left Triumph, and said, I know you guys are developing a new triple, because we already had the 675 triple. However, somehow he knew that we were developing a 765 version of it. There's no secrets in the motorcycle industry.
No,
or very few.
No, you're not wrong.
So Neil said, look, I know you've got a new engine on the way. Dorna are really keen to work with somebody whose engine is fresh rather than somebody whose engine is, coming towards the end of its life. And if you want, I'll put you in touch with the right people. So I thought, being a race fan, it was like, yeah. And then I started thinking, how am I going to get this across the line?
But having the confidence in the product. So how much development did the 765 have at this point before the phone call came about?
So we were still about a year away from going into volume production with the 765 engine.
And at this point, within this year, you're still demolition testing it, really, engineering testing it, and working on it.
Yeah, so doing all the mileage testing and all this kind of stuff, doing all of the abuse testing and all that kind of stuff that, we get the odd tame racers to come in and have a go at trying to break them.
But how, from the word go, like this 765, how bomb-proof was it originally?
Oh, yeah, I mean, the thing with Triumph is we've built up a lot of engineering expertise over the years. So, I mean, coming back to John Bloor, one of the things that John's always wanted to do is basically build capability. And one of the things that he was really strong about was building capability in engineering. So by the time we come to develop a 765, you've got to remember that we'd already been through a 600cc 4-cylinder engine. We'd learnt a lot of stuff from that. We decided that 4 cylinders wasn't the right way to go. We went to a 675 3-cylinder. That had probably, by that stage, I'd probably gone through a couple of iterations of that where we'd learnt stuff. People had been racing Daytona 675s for quite a while. We'd learnt quite a lot of stuff from that. So,
because don't hate me when I say this, I think great power, great chassis, great everything, but they were known a little bit in the racing world of being temperamental. They could have, when they broke. But this leads us on to the next chapter of the 765.
Yeah. So the 675, I mean, I've heard a lot of stories about, people were rebuilding engines every practice and every,
And the rumour mill's strong in this game. And the rumour, isn't it?
Yeah. That's literally the first time I've ever heard that.
Oh, no, but...
Have you not?
I've never... And I've had
you've got a job to worry about.
No, I genuinely... the only thing that I ever had with mine when they first came out in 06, wasn't it? The under-seat can.
Yeah.
I raced one in stock 600 in 07, and a few of us had ECUs that went pop. But we all did the same thing to cause the problem, which was turning them from a running engine, we turned them off on the kill switch on the handlebar, and for some reason it seemed to surge something. But engines were never. That's literally the first time I ever heard that.
Sorry, I feel like I should tidy up my point, because when Chrissy won the 675 championship within Triumph, and the stock bikes, very, very reliable. Solid, but like every race in the world, you get the Dremel out and you start messing. But this is the thing.
So this is the issue for me. So back in those days, obviously Triumph didn't have really an official racing department as such. So there was a lot of people out there who were taking the stock 675 engine, which, as you say, was super reliable, and they were doing stuff to it that our engineers probably would have gone,
what are you doing?
Yeah, what are you doing? Things like how much material they were skimming off cylinder heads, for example. Yeah. So I've seen a few of the issues that people were having, and quite frankly, it was because people were pushing it beyond where they should have been pushing it.
Yeah, well, no, that's
the reality of it, which is why I think where we are now, where we've got a little bit more officially into the racing side, and now the engines come with an official conversion kit. And at the moment, all of the conversion on the engines is done by PHL Performance, Pete Hickman's guys up in Louth. That gives us a lot more confidence that in Supersport racing, anybody who's now running a Triumph in Supersport racing has got an engine that is pretty bulletproof.
But then, if they don't choose to use those conversion kits and follow the recommendation,
well, that's the only thing that's homologated.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. But like looking through the history of it, like your TZs, your back in the day, everyone used to buy a stock thing and could mess on with the shed. You know what I mean? That was the racer's edge. I could do something a little bit different and build a market. So that's the only reason the Triumph 675 got a weaker reputation in super sport, not stock. But when you look at the history of your Moto2, so 5 years.
Yep. 1.3 million kilometres of racing we've done.
And how many have gone pop?
Yeah.
Because that's the impressive one, isn't it?
Yeah, so there was actually, if you saw it this year in Qatar, there was one that did go pop. Well, that's the first time that one's gone pop.
I was telling him about it earlier on, the success rates, phenomenal. I couldn't remember how many.
Yeah. That's exactly the case and point. You know what I mean? That like I say, not everyone thinks the same, but that weak reputation is being literally blown out the water by one failure in 5 years of arguably the best riders in the world, revving the absolute nuts of it, and one's gone bang.
But you guys, it used to, when I first got involved, I used to think, coming from being a landscaper, why is there so many pieces of paper? Why is there so many fucking procedures? But actually, it all makes complete sense. Yeah. And it takes, as a moron, it took a little bit of time to get used to. but that's why it works, because the procedures, everything is there for a reason, and everything's traceable, and everything makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, what happens over the years is, if something goes wrong, you understand it, and you put a process and a procedure in place to make sure it doesn't happen again, which means that over time you've got quite a lot of processes and quite a lot of procedures. But what those things do is they protect you as a brand and as a business from putting something out there that might give you a problem. So that's why it's there. But yeah, I mean, that engine has been unbelievably reliable, and like I say, it's not just 32 of the fastest riders in the world, it's 32 guys who desperately want a MotoGP contract. So
they're not fussed about valves.
No. Not at all. Well, not at all.
And to be honest, about footing the bill either, are they?
No, they're really not. And to be honest, that's one of the problems that we have. People think, as a single make supplier into a series, that's dead easy, because you're going to win every week. But the reality is, we're not contracted to any one of those riders. So we don't have any contractual control over any of those riders to say, excuse me, would you mind not doing that? And quite honestly, over the last 5 years, one of the issues we've had is guys over-revving it on the downshift. Because obviously you can put a rev limiter on the upshift. So, we started off at 14,000 RPM as the rev limit. We've gone up to 14.4, but on the downshift, we've seen like 15.6, and
How rods aren't just coming through the front of the cases.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. I mean, and it, And in the first couple of seasons, you know, we had a lot in the first couple of seasons. We've had less and less as time's gone on, because the riders have realised that actually that's not the fastest way to ride them.
Yeah.
So we've had less and less. But in the early seasons, we were going to the riders going, look, genuinely, please don't do that, because sooner or later somebody is going to have one let go, and we're just warning you that, you know, the engine's not designed to rev to 15.6. It's designed to rev to 5. So, you know, but and then they kept saying, but, you know, we've never had a problem, so why don't you just let us do what we want? It's like, no, guys, honestly, you know, sooner or later, one of these will let go if you keep doing that.
And you sort of haven't, just going back to your point around the contractual obligation to each individual.
Yeah.
You also don't have an invested interest in any specific rider doing well, have you? You need to make sure that as a company you supply 32 completely equal engines, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, all of the engines after they're built, they go on the dyno, and within a batch, they're probably maximum 1.5 PS between, you know, the lowest and the highest power. So,
and that's hard to do. That's very hard to.
It is hard to do,
because it's like a human heart. You know, no two heartbeats are the same. Same with an engine. You know, everyone thinks they come off a factory line. The tolerances are that minor, but in every part of an engine, if you collectively put that together, you are going to have power change. Simple as that.
Are they all built in a specific workshop by a specific person?
It's chained to it right now.
Continuity. or is it a case of standard production line? We need to do the 35 off of those engines. Is it? So, if you can talk about that.
So they do go down the standard production process. The important thing really is the machining tolerances.
Right.
So, like you say, probably the biggest difference you can get in a manufacturing process is the kind of tolerances you get when you're machining something. So, when we're machining the crankcases and the cylinder heads for a Moto 2 engine, we make sure that they're all done on a single shift, and they're done on a shift where there's no breaks and the temperature is consistent and the humidity is consistent. So they all actually come off at a much tighter tolerance than a production cylinder head or crankcases would do. So yeah, there's more control put in for the Moto 2 stuff.
Right. Is that done over here?
No, that's done in Thailand.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. How many engines do they get a year?
So they get a fresh engine every 3 rounds.
Right.
Or they have done up till now, but with the changes they've got now with the qualifying process, because qualifying time's now shorter than it was in the past. There's no free practice on a Sunday morning for Moto 2.
Right.
So actually we can now extend it to 4 rounds between engine refreshes for the teams. So they do about 1,500 kilometres before they have a top-end rebuild.
It's a hard 1,500 kilometres, that though.
Yeah, that's very, very hard.
That is hard.
Yeah.
Do they run them in?
What?
Exactly, yeah, no. I didn't know if they,
The only run them in they get is on the crate, on the plane. Air miles. That's the only thing
mad, isn't it? That, like,
they have to book them into the local dealer after 500.
Jesus. You know, when you've got a bit of mechanical sympathy, you want to run an engine in, don't you? You want all of those.
Not when you're a contracted rider in Moto 2.
Just to settle themselves in a little bit, don't you? Straight out to thrashing the...
Yeah.
Fair play.
In your opinion, could this have gone wrong, signing the Moto 2?
I think it was I mean, there's always that gamble, isn't there? There's always a risk to it. Mm-hmm. But once you start to analyse it and say, okay, what are the possible things that could go wrong here? Then basically say, okay, to make sure that we're comfortable with this, what's the testing that we need to put in process to make sure that we're comfortable? So we agreed that, okay, although we've got a rev limiter on there, we're going to actually test them on the test rigs much higher than that, just to make sure that so you always put a bit of a safety factor in there. And then you do durability testing, where basically you stick it on an engine rig and run it absolutely flat out for...
I'd love to hear that.
It's unbelievable.
It'd be like nails on a chalkboard.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
Stand there and watch them.
Yeah, and the headers glow bright red. It's
brilliant.
It's brilliant stuff to watch. I mean, for anybody that's into bikes or engines, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
But, so you do all that kind of stuff, and then we get guys to do track durability. So believe it or not, when we were developing the Moto 2 engines, Jake Dixon actually did some of the track endurance stuff for us.
Did he?
I mean, you've done track endurance stuff, haven't you?
Yeah.
So Jake actually did some of the track endurance before he was even signed to go into into Moto 2, which is quite interesting.
The track endurance is like as well. I was always told you have to ride almost like you're on a track day. You need to be getting stuck in.
Yeah,
but you need to
not crash.
The point is the mileage. Yeah, you need the miles.
Not roll the bike.
You're not going for a qualifying lap because if you crash the bike, the test has to start again, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas you need to basically be pushing on and stressing it. And how many miles did they have to do on that?
Oh, I don't remember. It's a lot.
Yeah,
it is a lot.
Because I every time I've done it, I've always thought like any minute now, the way we're treating them, but they don't, do they? That's credit to the whole process at the beginning of it all.
And then obviously, I mean, the big thing we had was following Honda, and everybody saying, "Oh, Hondas have been super reliable." Are you sure you want to do this? Don't you think there's a reputation risk here and all that kind of stuff? And there was, quite clearly there was. And I remember I went to the first round in Qatar, the first ever Triumph Moto 2 race.
Covered in shamrocks and fingers everything crossed, you know what I mean? He's got horseshoes hanging off him. He's like sat there going, don't fucking spit.
The very first practice, the bikes went out, and literally I was counting every single one going past, going, yeah, 32, brilliant. And then I think it was about 2 laps in, on the big screen, there was a bike stopped out on the circuit, and I'm thinking, oh shit. And then the cameras panned in on the circuit, and there was something that looked like it was glistening on the surface. And at this point, I'm shitting myself.
Yeah.
Thinking, oh God. The first ever practice with the Triumph engines, and one's gone bang. And it hadn't. Basically, the mechanic hadn't pushed one of the connectors together well enough, and it was an electrical fault. What the fuck that camera had picked up on the surface, I had no idea.
Does it sometimes, doesn't it? The angle, you end up with almost like a heat hand.
Like a sheet, yeah. But the first thing that came into my mind was oil,
spat
or coolant or something. It's like shit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, honestly, the whole of that first season, I watched every single session on either at the circuit or on TV.
You go to a lot of them, don't you? Nearly all of them.
Yeah, not so much now, but yeah, in the early days, I went to quite a few.
How many did you do last year?
Last year, I think I only did 3.
Did you?
Yeah.
He's got confidence in the product now.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, you do. I mean, as the longer it goes on, I mean, it gets to the point now where, some of the sessions, I might look at the results at the end and not worry too much about it.
Yeah.
Has
that engine been updated with each year, or is it the same engine as?
So it's not been updated every year, but we've done two updates.
Right.
So we did an update where we gave it a bit more power and a bit more revs. And we've done an update recently where we've improved the gear change process. And then for next year, the main focus for next year is they're going to 40% sustainable fuels. So we've had to do quite a lot of work with the sustainable fuels to make sure that, we're still delivering the power.
Yeah.
And we've still got the durability in the engines and all that kind of stuff.
Not burning out valves and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
What's the highest you've got on a downshift on the rigs? Have you done like downshift?
Oh, I don't know what we've done on the rigs. But I mean,
just be interested to see if you guys got like 17 out of it on the rigs, without it shitting itself.
So on the rigs, we wouldn't do it as a downshift. We'd actually just spin it at that speed, because all you're effectively trying to do is to make sure that as the engine's spinning at that speed, nothing's losing contact. Valves aren't losing contact with cams and hitting pistons and stuff. So yeah, you just basically over rev it.
Fantastic.
I would love to see that. I would generally, as far as trying your PR team, you need to get that out on YouTube or something.
Don't do a lot with the PR stuff around racing, do they? Not as much as when I go on my Instagram, it's the racing does seem to. It's such a big thing.
So it's just now starting to get an awful lot more important and a lot bigger for the company, because this year we're doing Supercross and we're doing MX2 racing.
We've already had a round, haven't we?
So there's a round this weekend, isn't there? First round of Supercross is at Anaheim.
Is that tonight?
Yeah, that's tonight. So
I don't even know what day it is.
Sunday. Supercross Sunday. So oh my God, I'm looking forward to watching this.
So we're not racing tonight because we're going to be doing East Coast rather, because we're in 250s only this year.
Yes.
So we're doing East Coast. So I think we kick off beginning of February in Detroit.
Are you happy to talk to us about how the motocross thing came about, because that's been like a hugely anticipated thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have said to me,
That's
what's going on with the motocross bike? And I didn't have it's all been very well kept under wraps, hasn't it, really? But
I mean, it's been, to be honest, it's been kicking around for a while. So even before I was in the job I'm in now, the guy who was doing the job before me had some conversations with John Bloor about, other areas of the bike market that Triumph weren't competing in. And obviously one of the biggest ones that we weren't competing in, which is, potentially a huge segment, was off-road bikes.
Yeah.
So those conversations have been had over the years, but it was never quite the right time to kick it off. But then probably, 5-6 years ago now, we picked up that conversation again, and it's like, okay, let's have another look at this market. Let's understand it. We were starting to go into Moto 2. We were getting some credibility from going Moto 2 racing. We went out and did some research with customers and basically said, if Triumph came out with a motocross bike, would you treat us seriously, basically? So would you give us the credibility? And people said, from what we've seen you do in Moto 2, absolutely. If you can do that, then why wouldn't you be able to do a motocross bike? So that kind of gave us the confidence to say, okay, let's go for it.
Yeah. It is a massive market. We think like tarmac racing is like schoolboy. It's called schoolboy racing for a reason. You know what I mean? Jonathan Ray, for crying out loud, even his words, I remember reading that in an article. It was like, he's a failed motocross rider. It is it's the hardest sport on the planet, period. And the reach is humongous. Yeah. And it's now, you think about having the balls to jump into Moto 2 with the world watching. Motocross is a different, and then you go and get someone like what's his name, Ricky Carmichael, you know what I mean, the GOAT involved. Whose idea? Please tell me that was your idea.
So how Ricky came about was basically there's a guy that works in our US office, Rod, who used
That's
to work...
the most American name.
Yeah, I can't even pronounce his second name, so don't even ask me.
Rod America.
But so Rod was at Suzuki when Ricky was a Suzuki rider, basically. So they've known each other for years. So as soon as Rod knew that we were thinking about doing the motocross thing, he said, well, what you want to do is you need to come out to the US and get into it and experience the scene. So me and another guy went out to Vegas.
Strictly business.
I want to say tough gig. Yeah.
So we went out to watch the Supercross in Vegas
with the company car.
Which
that would have been amazing.
We're not going there, mate.
Can I have his job when you sack him?
So we went out to Supercross in Vegas, and Rod was there, and he said, you know what, Ricky's in town. He said, do you fancy meeting up with him? It's like, what?
There's a best shit in
the So then, like half an hour later, he came back and he said, been on the phone to Ricky and his manager, and he said he's available for breakfast in the morning. Fucking hell, breakfast with Ricky. Anyway, we ended up having breakfast with Ricky Carmichael, sat out in front of this hotel on the LA Strip. Fucking all the public walking past going, Ricky, it's like, unbelievable.
Absolutely.
But I mean, to be fair to Ricky, as soon as he understood that, Triumph as a new manufacturer wanted to get into this world and, we're serious about doing it, he was like, I'm in. I want to be involved. I want to be involved with that.
Now, out of everyone, in my opinion, out of anyone who can lose on the motocross side, it would be Ricky Martin. Ricky Martin. Living the vida loca. Jesus Christ. What am I thinking? I'm thinking of the beach in Vegas here. I'm on the Ricky Carmichael has got the most to lose. His reputation. And someone like him, Jeremy McGrath, David Villeman, you know what I mean? Stefan Everts. You put their name to a brand.
Yeah.
It's got to work.
Yeah.
Because they have lost everything. You know what I mean? Because if the bike's shit and he's standing there going, it's good, but it's shit, no one's going to believe him, and definitely not Triumph.
But also for him, the flip side of it, I would think, is that as a rider with all his experience and all the credibility, then with the confidence from a conversation with you guys, he's got an opportunity to pretty much build the perfect bike. Because he already knows what works and what doesn't work, and what he's had in the past that's allowed him to be successful, but also the shortfallings that maybe were there. So he's in a perfect position, and you guys are in the position to be able to offer him the package, I guess, to build that.
Yeah. I mean, the main feedback he had from Suzuki was, please give me an electric start.
I'm sick of kicking it.
So I don't have to kick it.
I'll tell that to Kenny Roxon. Kickstart Kenny. Tell that to him. There you are. But all seriously, like, how much of an open playbook did you give Ricky Carmichael, aka Ricky Martin?
So, I mean, we brought Ricky in, and at the time when Ricky started getting involved, we already had some schemes done. So with Ricky, it's more a question of, Ricky, this is our thinking in terms of where we want to go with it. What's your thoughts? So it's not like, Ricky's sat there at a CAD terminal designing a frame or anything like that.
No.
But it's more a question of, Ricky, this is, or out of the benchmarks, this is what we think works and what we think doesn't work, and this is why we think it works and why we think it doesn't work. And it's more, with Ricky, it's more a question of a sanity check with him to say, do you agree with that, or would you take it in a different direction? And the other good thing with Ricky is the contacts that he's got. So, that's the main thing in terms of, like, if you want somebody who is an expert in, suspension, for example, Ricky will say, well, if it was me, I'd be speaking to this guy. So that's the kind of benefit. And then obviously once we started building a bike, getting Ricky on a bike, he's still fast. Let's be honest.
Saw them promotional videos.
And he's smooth.
Yeah.
I mean, he's, for me, the guys that I love to watch are the guys who are fast but don't look fast.
Yeah.
And he's one of those guys. So smooth.
And his feedback's good, and he's able to explain things to you that make complete sense. Because you get fast guys who can't give feedback.
Exactly.
And you sit there going, well, all right, you've done that lap time, that's brilliant, but can you please elaborate? And they can't give you it, can they?
Yeah, exactly.
You need someone who can explain to you exactly what's going on with that bike.
Yeah.
And he's able to do that, is he?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Obviously, we've got other test riders that are involved as well, because I think what people need to remember is that what we're doing here is we're developing a race bike and a production bike,
right?
And those two things are quite different in some ways. So you've got to have a production bike that your average club racer can get on and ride super fast.
Yeah.
But then once you get your pro riders on there, that's taking it to, a whole different level.
Yeah.
So, and actually developing those two things at the same time is a lot of work.
When is the bike available?
So it should be in showrooms in the UK in March.
I'm getting a loan out. I'm not just saying that across me. When the press photos came out.
Yeah.
Oh my God! Because at the moment you're only developing the 250.
Yeah. So we've got a 450 program as well.
Oh yes.
So we're going 250 racing this year, and then the 450 will follow.
Because the 450, in my opinion, looking at the market, it's like the 1 litres, but the 1 litres in motocross term can go flat track.
Yep.
Supermoto, and
Dakar.
The Dakar.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's a bigger market. So why start on the 250? Is it? Yeah, why start on the 250?
Why start on the 250? Because actually, if you look at performance per litre, the 250 engine is the highest performing of the engines. So you've got to squeeze more performance out of a 250 than you need to squeeze out of a 450, basically. So if we can get the 250 right and we can hit the power targets, which we are doing, then the 450 actually, what you learn from the 250 makes the 450 an easier bike to develop. Right. So that's the reason we've done it that way around.
Because it is like when you look at the motocross market, it's like the Hondas and the KTM. God, look, I can say the names, he can't. Like the KTM, like dabbled in the injection, like fuel injected market, and the engines are too weak, and that they're struggling to move the bikes, and they're going to have to up the game on that side. The Hondas, the Conrads are going through the cases, and you're thinking, crying out loud. But if Triumph can deliver the reliability of their Moto 2 into a 250, you'd struggle to find a lot of 450 riders in motocross. That is my stomach. I apologise. No, but it's like, you heard that through the headphones.
Got a small bike going past.
That's the new 255. No, Jesus, man, get that checked. But if you can make the 250 as reliable as the 450 in the current market, you'll have more people on the twos.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
I'm praying and hoping.
Yeah.
Looking in your eyes, top of the food chain. I've got the confidence. Take my money.
But again, you wouldn't do it as a manufacturer if you weren't confident you could deliver on it, would you?
We would never put something into the market that wasn't, ready, reliable, etc., etc. And we do so much back-to-back benchmarking and testing with all of the competitor bikes, so we know where they are. We know what their reliability is. We know where their weak points are. So, as a newcomer into the market, we can't afford to be less than what's already out there.
Yeah. If you need a dipstick tester on the motocross side, I'll quietly put one in the van on the way home. I'll happily test that for you every day of the week, no bother. But so we've got the motocross market, we've got the Moto2. What's the next step?
Well, super sport racing is going to be a bigger thing for us this year as well. Obviously,
that market is beautiful at the minute, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the most competitive racing we've got.
Yeah, obviously super sport rules have had to change because, again, the manufacturers have gone away from developing out-and-out super sport 600s. The bikes developed and evolved primarily to win races, and they evolved to the point where people no longer wanted them as a road bike. So, your R6s and that kind of stuff, really. You haven't been able to buy it as a road bike now for well over a year, have you? So you can only buy it as a track bike, really. So the class had to change to allow bikes to come in that weren't developed specifically for out-and-out sports bike racing, which is where our 765 came in. So our super sport bike is developed off of the naked bike, off of the street 765. And then obviously there's an engine kit that goes with that, and then you put effectively a replica Daytona race fairing on it and a few other bits and pieces. And then this year they're changing the regulations to allow a few more chassis mods because some of these bikes coming into the championship haven't been developed as out and out track bikes or race bikes, then the geometry isn't exactly spot on for racing. So, one of the things that we've been lobbying for the last couple of years really is if you want more bikes coming into this championship and more manufacturers coming in, you're going to have to allow a little bit of leeway on some of the chassis stuff just so that we can all compete on a kind of a level playing field. Yeah. So in the British Championship this year, you can change the suspension linkage, you can change the swing arm pivot position, you can change the yokes, so you can change the offset. You can change a few changes with the head angle. So I think we'll have a really nice competitive package this year.
Oh, the reason I was nudging him, by the way, is because I guessed yokes. He's like, you can make some changes this year. And I just said yokes. I was pulling out my arse, but it's official now. So that's why I'm nudging him. But like I said at the beginning of this, Josh Davies Motorsport is kindly supporting this podcast and sponsoring this. But he's one of the only R6s. Yeah. His team are on the grid. Can we say how many are on? It's going to be between Ducati and Triumph next year. Because the success in the domestic market, you've got Peter Hickman dominating on the roads. He's always won a TT, so that's a massive tick. You've got you had Richard Cooper on the box at Cadwell.
Yep.
Did he win or?
No, you got a second.
No, but like you say, with the geometry change, it's going to be an interesting year. And until the full start list comes out, we're going to be not seeing many Yamahas by all accounts. Yeah, is that a win for Triumph? It's got to be.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. Honestly, I still think the Yamaha chassis is a really, really good chassis. I think the issue they've got, obviously, with it being a 600cc four-cylinder is they've got good top speed. Where they are probably falling a little bit behind is punch coming out of the corners.
Yes.
Quite honestly. And likewise, some of the rest of us have been struggling a little bit with the Ducati because the Ducati has got massive punch coming out of the corners.
Oh, you can see that in the foot. It's incredible when you watch it. It just sits, barks and goes. It's class.
So I think, they've got to continually look at that just to make sure that they're getting the balance right between all of the different manufacturers. But to be fair, I think they've done a pretty good job so far. I think we'll be in a better position chassis side this year. So, we've got Luke Stapleford on the bike.
Right.
So we're working with Macadam Racing this year, who've obviously won championships in the past. So we've got a great team.
Luke's been on a Triumph for a long time as well.
Luke's won on a Triumph, so I think, and he's really fired up. So that's looking good.
And it is a difficult year. As a hardcore race fan as myself, if you turned up on it's never a weak grid, never ever a weak grid in British. But you're talking this year, there are some fast lads.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you've got Jack Kennedy going on the Honda. You've even got Bradley Peary back in. He's back on the Kawasaki. Well, he's never ridden a Kawasaki, but he's on the Kawasaki. And you're thinking it's
a tough class.
It's going to be the class to watch, in my opinion.
Yeah,
It really is.
It's going to be exciting racing, which is what we want.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there'll be, I expect there'll be a couple of Suzukis on there. There'll probably be, I don't know, half a dozen Ducatis on there. There's going to be at least 5 Triumphs that I know of. I can't give you all the details, but,
You will after the show.
You can tell us and we'll edit it out.
Yeah.
Maybe.
You definitely want to see a copy of this now.
So I think it's going to be real good. I mean, that series, historically has been a marvellous series, hasn't it? Supersport racing in the UK. I mean, you think some of the guys who've come through Supersport racing in the UK, and gone on to World Championship level. It's been an unbelievable sort of development ground for British racers.
Absolutely.
And it needs to get back to that, doesn't it? It needs to get back to being, this is a championship that the youngsters aspire to be in, because they know that if they do well there, they've got a chance of moving somewhere else.
It's had a couple of sort of tough years, hasn't it, really? A couple of sort of stale...
It's already a predicted grid. When you think like 5 years ago, you're thinking anyone could win this. It's like... Supersport, in my opinion, became predictable.
Yeah.
You know who's going to be 1, 2, and 3. You could see, and then if anyone stepped in, you think, well, they're going to be there. This year, hopefully, it's just going to be like, who's going to have it this weekend? And that's what we get in BSB. Now we've got a thing with the Ducatis. We're not sure if they're going to be there, and it's going to be a spicy year.
Yeah,
because we want to watch racing. Doesn't matter what it is, ostrich racing to giraffe racing.
It's got to be close.
It's got to be close.
It's got to be close.
Yeah.
And you can't guess it. That's perfect racing when you can't guess it.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
But before we move on to the Patreon questions, you got any more pay rise? You were going to ask about a pay rise.
That's not Just straight into the Patreon questions.
Tony Rolls, can Joe have a pay rise?
I didn't know we paid you.
No, I just do it for the love of it, Steve.
So he can come on again, Joe. Get on there. So we've got one from... Do you want to go for it? Are you going for Jess or Tony's?
You go.
I'll go for Tony. I haven't even read this, so I apologise. Tony Rolls. Where is Triumph on, oh my God, electrification side of things? With Kawasaki going hydrogen, and what's going to happen? By the way, the 675 is amazing. Thanks for producing it. There you are, Tony. You ask it. I love you, mate. There you are.
Yeah, electrification's it's an interesting question, because everybody's, I think, kind of struggling with where to go with it. Because the problem with electrification on motorcycles is what you can actually physically put on a bike as a battery. And how much range you can actually get out of it. And, the technology is the technology. Whilst the technology is always moving forwards, it's not moving forwards probably as quickly as some people want or expect it to go. So the realities are right now that if we were to produce an electric version of, say, if you take like a speed triple, we did a prototype a couple of years ago. We created an electric version of a speed triple. We called it a TE1 prototype. The reality of that bike is, if you run it through what I would call an urban riding cycle, so riding it through town, you might get 100 miles out of it. The problem with electric is the harder you ride it, the faster you deplete the battery. So if you ride a speed triple the way that, let's take Joe for example, if the way that Joe would want to ride a speed triple, you might get 50 miles at range out of it, out of a full charge, and the cost of producing that bike would be a lot higher. So you'd be talking about probably having to sell a bike for £30,000 and be only able to get 50 miles range out of it. Whereas you can buy a speed triple for, nearly half of that and get 150 miles range out of it.
And get laid.
We are talking about Joe.
I need a calendar. I have to book an appointment.
Why did you turn up the guns? All right, get off me drive.
So I think where most of the industry are now in terms of a consensus on it is Electric makes sense for bikes up to an equivalent of about a 125cc bike. Anything over and above that, at the moment, the technology just does not support going electric. So a lot of companies like ourselves are looking at the options of sustainable fuels as being an alternative, because actually you can implement sustainable fuels a lot quicker than you can implement electric, because you're not having to change the basic architecture of the bike, you're not having to change the basic engine technology. So that's kind of where we are on it.
Yeah, good.
You guys looked into hydrogen yet?
Hydrogen has got all kinds of problems associated with it. I mean, if you're talking about hydrogen fuel cells, you've got the same issue with how do you package it on the bike. If you're talking about having a tank sat next to your bollocks with hydrogen filled in it.
That's the thing. But this is why the car manufacturers are struggling with it as well, aren't they?
Then,
because
I'm sorry. How could you not sell that, mate? That's a bomb. Take my money. You know what I mean? You will get laid.
or die.
Well, both in the same.
You'd have a temporary feeling of well-being anyway. But you'd want that tank to be pretty robust, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
About that thick of steel, yeah.
Yeah, the demonstrator getting a hammer. Ding, it's safe, sir. Yeah, you got a point about that. But
the other thing with hydrogen is it kicks out other nasties that, it's not CO2, it's nitrous oxide and stuff like that. So,
which is quite naughty, really. If chemistry taught me anything, that's naughty.
I've had to make it bigger because my eyes are on the way out.
Oh, shut up, you.
Jess Mortimer, with the success of the Moto2 deal, why isn't there a true race rep in the Triumph catalogue?
Ooh.
So, really...
Sorry, I did also ask about what Triumph were going to do to encourage younger people in the motorcycle community.
But we touched on that, we've definitely touched on that.
It's an industry
no worries.
issue, rather. But the question about the Moto2 deal, why isn't there a true race rep?
So, as we've said a couple of times, I think the kind of the out-and-out super sport bike is kind of a dead segment in many ways, which is why Yamaha aren't doing any R6s anymore and all that kind of stuff. So what we have just launched, or hopefully will have launched by the time this comes out, because we're launching it tomorrow, so we'll be okay, boys.
Okay, Grace is amazing.
She's not that good.
I'll tell you what, as far as any woman in the world, she'll take this challenge on. But bear in mind, we'll be getting home it next
tomorrow.
So we're about to launch a Daytona 660.
Right.
Which really is where sports bikes have gone, which is a bit more of a road-biased sport bike, which comes in... I mean, like, when I was in my 20s, everybody rode super sport bikes, but they were a bike that you could tour Europe on, as well as travel to work on, and as well as do a track day on, so they're a little bit more of an all-rounder.
Yeah.
And I think sport bikes have gone back to something more like that. Which is why we've developed a Daytona 660.
Triple or twin?
Triple.
Damn it, I was thinking the super twin market there for the Isle of Man TT. Just got to...
Well...
hold on now.
I'm just saying, I can't move,
but there's a lot of internal politics, but you'll have to stay tuned later down the line for Chasin the Racin to find that rumour mill out. No, but it's...
So there is a new sport bike class in British Championship next year,
and that bike will be eligible.
Which allows you to run a 660 triple.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to seeing that. There you are. We'll be in the kitchen with a coffee. Give me the slides, Joe. Happy days. But have we got any more questions, my man?
Nah, I still like going to work sometimes, so I'm done at that.
I like you want to keep your job, is that what you're saying, son? I like it. Absolutely fantastic. Good. Hey, thank you so much for being on the show. Absolutely loved it. My head's blown off with I've generally enjoyed it. I've learned a hell of a lot. This little thick skull has absorbed something today. So yet again, thank you so much to our sponsors, OMG, Bennett and JC Truck and Trailer Rental. See how much smoother that was, Joe?
That was much better.
It wasn't much better. You can tell he's a dad, can't you? It wasn't good, but it was better.
He's encouraging to a level.
If you just applied yourself.
You weren't just a dick there. But obviously...
It's worth saying as well, with Bennett's, the bike social stuff's going to be coming online very soon. So I'll keep an eye on that, because obviously with the build up to spring and everything, Bennett's...
I know, and their track day release has already come out, so you're looking at May, and they've obviously got the legends like John McGuinness and everyone going around on the track, so please sign up for that. The benefits you get from being part of Bennett's is massive, absolutely massive. But yet again, thank you so much, OMG. Bennett, I keep looking at it, JC, that will sink in. That will beautifully sink in one point. And This episode has been brought to you specifically by JDM Racing, which is Josh Davies Racing, and they are the one to keep an eye out, chasing your triumphs down.
Hopefully a bit further back.
But no, I tell you what, it is going to be interesting because he's coming in. Like, it's so important that people are starting race teams.
Yeah,
because a lot of people are dropping out rather than building up. So it's important that people are joining up into the ranks, especially the deep end that is now super sports. So happy days. But no, final thing is, Grace, we're not going to get told off for the length of that episode. That is absolutely bang on. So Grace, thank you so much for all your work. And thank you to all your listeners, and take care. See you in a bit.
Cheers. Lovely.